This story is about my grandfather. It happened before I was born, and was told to me by my grandmother. It is worth noting that she was a woman with unusual abilities, had knowledge of the other world, was able to communicate with animals and use protective methods against evil forces. As an energetic young man, grandfather lost his best friend in an accident when he was young. The loss of a loved one is always hard, especially if they pass away at a young age. It was a difficult ordeal for my grandfather. He even stopped talking to his family after the tragedy, just went to his room and shut himself away for more than a day. However, the real nightmare began after the funeral. Our house was not far from the cemetery, visible even from the yard, on the other side of the river. After saying goodbye to the deceased, all the closest people gathered to commemorate him right by the fresh grave and raised their glasses to the deceased. About a week later, my grandmother noticed that my grandfather's face changed. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, and he lost his appetite. He started going to bed separately and locking the door. He answered questions evasively, without complaining about his health. As time went on, his appearance became more and more frightening, and he began to look into the bottle every day. On the eve of the 40-day wake, the grandmother heard a phrase from her grandfather: "Why should I go to commemorate him when he comes to me every night?" The grandmother began to guess the reasons for her husband's strange behavior and deteriorating health. She rushed to her friends to find out what had happened at the funeral without asking her grandfather, realizing that she could not get anything from him. Grandmother asked her friends to remember what grandfather had done that day. And after understanding the situation, she took holy water, a head of holy poppy, kissed the cross and prayed in front of the icon. Taking advantage of the fact that the room was empty, she sprinkled the poppy and sprinkled holy water, saying a prayer. Then she hung the consecrated herbs in the corners of the house and waited for the result. At night she could not sleep because of the strong wind that seemed capable of tearing off the roof or blowing out the windows. Grandmother could only pray and rely on help from above. In the morning, it subsided. It turned out that on the way back, Grandpa noticed that he had forgotten a handkerchief and bread at the cemetery, which was usually given to those who carried the coffin to the grave. If Grandma had been around, the story might have ended, but it had progressed far beyond that. Without hesitation, Grandpa turned and went back to retrieve the forgotten items. Unlike grandmother, he did not believe in mysticism and did not allow the idea that everything left in the cemetery belonged to him. Previously, the grandmother had heard of similar cases, when the deceased came home with someone who forgot the items left on the grave. The deceased came every night, socialized, ate and drank, even slept in the same bed as the host, slowly sucking out his life force. The same thing was happening to her loved one, and something had to be done before the 40th day arrived. She had heard that after that deadline it was no longer possible to get rid of the deceased from the house. It leaves on its own when it completely consumes the life forces, bringing the person to death. On the 40th day, the grandparents, together with their friends, went to the grave. There they held a conversation, remembered the departed, and went away. Only the grandmother stayed for a moment, took out a loaf of bread from under the floor and put it on the mound with the cross. In this way, she returned the lost objects to the cemetery.